The roar of diesel engines ripped through my sleep at 3:17 in the morning. Echoing from somewhere, engines had no business being inside my own garage. The sound set off every dog in Pinewood Estates. But no one else dared step outside to check. I was different. I stood behind my bedroom window, watching headlights cut through the cracks in the garage door, watching four figures in security uniforms, drinking coffee, charging laptops with my electricity, using my private space like it was some kind of public break room. 3 white trucks with HOA logos parked neatly inside, where my car had been just yesterday morning. They weren't invited, they weren't permitted, and they had no idea I was watching. So, I did what any engineer whose property had just been invaded at 3 in the morning would do. I activated the emergency lockdown from outside and let them sit trapped with their own trespass. The next 72 hours would expose the biggest scandal this neighborhood had ever seen. If you want to know what happened next, make sure to subscribe to my channel right now and hit that notification bell, because this story is just getting started. My name is Scott Jackson. I'm 44 years old, an electronics engineer who works from home in a quiet suburb outside Houston called Pinewood Estates. I bought this house after my divorce 2 years ago, choosing it specifically because it had a detached 3-car garage with its own entrance, perfect for the workshop I'd always wanted. The garage connects to the main house through a side door that I keep locked with a separate deadbolt. That night, the deadbolt was the only barrier between me and whatever operation was running 20 feet from my bedroom. I grabbed my phone and checked the garage door app. What I found made my stomach drop. Someone had changed the access code. The 4-digit PIN I'd used for 3 years had been replaced with something I'd never seen. They hadn't just entered my garage. They'd reprogrammed my own security system to lock me out. I moved through the dark house to the back door, stepping carefully to avoid making noise. The backyard was empty, the grass wet with dew, the only sound the distant hum of highway traffic. I crept along the fence line until I reached the small window on the side of the garage, the one partially hidden by overgrown bushes. Through the glass, I counted 4 men in security uniforms and 3 white trucks with HOA logos. But what caught my attention wasn't their presence, it was their organization. This wasn't a random stop. Ray Hoffman, the security patrol captain, stood over my workbench, studying a stack of documents spread across the surface. I could see manila folders, printed spreadsheets, and what looked like resident photographs clipped to paper. A large map of the neighborhood hung on my pegboard wall, marked with colored pins I hadn't put there. They had turned my private workshop into some kind of command center. I pulled out my phone and photographed everything through the window. Faces, trucks, documents, and the map with its mysterious pins. Each shot is time-stamped, and each frame is potential evidence. Then I stepped back and forced myself to think strategically instead of emotionally. I could call 911 right now, get them removed within the hour, and file a trespassing report. But that would give them time to destroy whatever they were working on. It would turn this into a he-said-she-said dispute with an HOA that had deeper pockets and more lawyers than I could afford. If I wanted to understand what they were really doing in my garage, I needed more than one night's worth of evidence. I needed to catch them in a pattern. That's when I remembered the dash cam. In the far corner of the garage, mounted on a shelf near the ceiling, was an old camera my ex-wife used to use. I'd installed it 2 years ago to monitor for mice and completely forgotten about it. I opened the app on my phone and felt my pulse quicken. Storage was 92% full. The camera had been recording continuously for months. Whatever was happening tonight was already saved. And whatever had happened on previous nights might be there too. I scrolled through the thumbnail previews, scanning dates at random. My hands went cold. I saw the same trucks in my garage on at least a dozen different dates going back over a year. This wasn't a one-time trespass. This was an ongoing operation that had been running under my nose while I slept. I had what I needed to make a decision. When I bought the house, the previous owner walked me through a hurricane-rated lockdown feature on the garage door system. It was designed to seal the exterior against storm damage, engaging heavy-duty bolts that could only be released from outside or through the main control panel in my house. The system included internal safety overrides. Ventilation would remain active, and the side door to the backyard would stay operational for emergency exit. I wasn't trapping anyone in a death box. I was securing my own property from unauthorized use while ensuring I had time to document everything properly. The law was clear. They were on my land without permission. I had every right to control access to my own structure. I opened the lockdown app and hovered over the activation button. The men inside had no idea I was awake. No idea they'd been photographed. No idea their operation had been recorded for months. If I pressed this button, they would be stuck until I decided otherwise. They would have access to the side yard exit if they really needed to leave, but their trucks and their documents and their little command center would stay exactly where they were. The thought gave me a grim satisfaction. They had been using my garage because they owned it. Now they were about to find out how wrong they were. I pressed the button. The garage door locks engaged with a heavy mechanical thunk that I could hear from inside the house. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I heard muffled voices, confused at first, then louder. Someone rattled the main door. Someone else cursed. I watched through the window as Ray Hoffman walked to the garage door and tried the manual release. Nothing. He tried the keypad. Nothing. He pulled out his phone and made a call, his face tight with frustration. I didn't know yet if they would try the side exit or stay put, but I knew one thing for certain. Whatever they were hiding in those folders, whatever those pins on my wall represented, I now had 72 hours to find out. And they had just made the biggest mistake of their careers. They got caught in their own operation. Inside my evidence locker, with nowhere to hide. The banging started at 7:32 in the morning. I hadn't slept. I'd spent the remaining hours of the night downloading footage from the dash cam, creating backup files, and documenting everything I could see through the garage window. By dawn, I had confirmed what I suspected. The camera had captured at least 47 separate instances of HOA security vehicles entering my garage over the past 2 years. 47 times. They had used my property without my knowledge. 47 times I had slept through their operation. The banging on my front door pulled me back to the immediate crisis. Ray Hoffman stood on my porch, his face red with anger, his security uniform wrinkled from a night spent trapped in my garage. Behind him, I could see 2 of his men standing near the locked garage door, arms crossed, waiting. I opened the front door but didn't step outside. Ray's jaw was tight, his voice clipped with barely controlled fury. "Mr. Jackson, you need to open that garage door right now. You've got 4 men and 3 vehicles locked in there, and if you don't release them immediately, I'm calling the police and reporting you for unlawful imprisonment." I leaned against the doorframe and kept my voice calm. "You entered my private property without permission. You changed my access codes. You've been using my garage as some kind of base for at least 2 years. If anyone should be calling the police, it's me." Ray's expression flickered, just for a moment, before hardening again. "We have authorization. This is all documented. You're making a serious mistake." I asked him to show me the documentation. He said it wasn't on him. I told him to come back when he had it. Then I closed the door and waited. The second confrontation came 2 hours later. A silver sedan pulled into my driveway at 9:45, and Brenda Kessler stepped out like she owned the neighborhood, which, in her mind, she probably did. She was 58 years old, impeccably dressed, and had been HOA president for 6 consecutive terms. Nobody ran against her anymore. Nobody questioned her decisions. She walked toward my front door, flanked by 2 board members whose names I didn't know, her heels clicking on the concrete with the confidence of someone who had never lost an argument in her life. I met her on the porch before she could knock. "Mr. Jackson," she began, her smile polished and professional in a way that didn't reach her eyes. "I understand there's been some confusion about our security team's access to your garage. I'm here to clear that up." She reached into her leather portfolio and produced a document, holding it out for me to see. The header read, "Security Access Agreement," in bold letters. Below it was a paragraph of legal language authorizing HOA security personnel to access my garage for purposes of community safety operations and equipment storage. At the bottom was a signature line with my name written in neat cursive, dated March 15th, 2021. I stared at it for a long moment, keeping my face neutral while my mind raced. I had never seen this document before. I had never signed anything giving the HOA access to my private property. But there was my name, clear as day, on a piece of paper that apparently made everything they'd done perfectly legal. Brenda watched me with the patient satisfaction of someone holding a winning hand. "As you can see, you signed this agreement 4 years ago, shortly after purchasing your home. Section 14.3 of our bylaws permits security access to structures within the designated easement zone, and your garage qualifies under the 2018 Community Plan. Our team has been operating fully within their rights. I looked up from the document. I never signed this. Her smile didn't waver. The signature suggests otherwise. Mr. Jackson. And I should warn you that your current actions locking our personnel inside your garage constitute unlawful detention and interference with authorized security operations. If you don't release them within 24 hours, we'll have no choice but to involve law enforcement and pursue civil damages. She paused, letting the threat settle. Additionally, you're now in violation of Section 9.7. That's $250 per day until you comply. The fines are already accruing. One of the board members stepped forward, a thin man with glasses who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Mr. Jackson, we're trying to resolve this amicably. Just open the garage, let our people out, and we can discuss this through proper channels. I looked at him, then at Brenda, then back at the document in her hand. My name, my supposed signature, a date. I was now being told I agreed to something I had no memory of agreeing to. From inside the garage, I could hear Ray Hoffman's voice shouting something into his radio. Brenda glanced toward the sound, then back at me. 24 hours, Mr. Jackson. After that, this becomes a legal matter. She turned and walked back to her car without waiting for a response. The board members followed. I stood on my porch and watched them drive away. The document's details burning in my mind. March 15th, 2021. The date kept repeating in my head as I walked back inside. Something about it felt wrong, felt impossible, but I couldn't immediately place why. I pulled out my phone and opened my calendar archive, scrolling back through years of appointments and reminders until I found it. March 2021. And there it was, marked in red, spanning 3 days from the 14th through the 16th, San Diego mom's funeral. My mother died on March 12th, 2021. I had flown to California the next day. I was standing beside her casket on March 15th, 2,000 miles away from Texas, surrounded by family members who could verify exactly where I was. I never signed that document. I couldn't have signed that document. And whoever forged my name had just made a fatal mistake. They picked a date I could prove I was somewhere else entirely. The funeral documents were exactly where I remembered them. I spent the next hour pulling together everything that proved I was in California on March 15th, 2021. The boarding pass from Houston to San Diego, dated March 13th. The hotel receipt from the Marriott near my mother's house shows a 3-night stay. The funeral home invoice with my signature, my real signature, dated March 15th. The condolence cards I'd saved, postmarked from that week. And most importantly, the photographs my sister had taken at the memorial service, time-stamped and geo-tagged, showing me standing beside my mother's casket at 2:14 in the afternoon Pacific time. Whoever had forged that security access agreement had chosen the worst possible date. They had given me an alibi made of grief. I needed legal confirmation before I moved forward. A quick search led me to Diana Reyes, a Houston attorney who specializes in HOA disputes and property rights. Her reviews mentioned she'd won cases others said were unwinnable. I called her office at 10:30 and explained my situation in broad strokes: unauthorized access, forged documents, ongoing trespass. She agreed to a video consultation within the hour. When her face appeared on my laptop screen, she looked exactly like her website photo, mid-40s. Sharp eyes, no-nonsense expression. She listened without interrupting as I walked her through the timeline, the footage, the fake agreement, and my alibi. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment before speaking. Mr. Jackson, let me explain what you're dealing with legally. Texas Penal Code Section 30.05 defines criminal trespass as entering or remaining on someone's property without effective consent. The fact that they changed your access code and have been using your garage repeatedly makes this a clear pattern of unauthorized entry. Their so-called security access agreement is meaningless if you can prove you didn't sign it, which it sounds like you can. She paused, making notes. Now, they mentioned a security easement under their bylaws. That's a common HOA tactic. But here's the thing, an easement has to be recorded in the property deed to be enforceable. It can't just be created through bylaws after the fact. Do you have a copy of your deed? I told her I'd pull it up. She nodded. Check Section 2, the legal description and encumbrances. If there's no recorded easement granting HOA access to your garage structure, their entire argument collapses. I found my deed in the digital files from my home purchase. Section 2 lists exactly 3 encumbrances: a utility easement for the power company, a drainage easement along the back property line, and a standard HOA covenant for exterior appearance standards. Nothing about security access, nothing about garage usage, nothing gave Brenda Kessler or Ray Hoffman the right to set 1 foot inside my private structure without my explicit permission. Diana confirmed what I suspected. They invented that easement. It doesn't exist in your deed, which means it doesn't exist legally. Whatever agreement they're waving around is either forged, fraudulent, or both. Yet I asked her what my next steps should be. She outlined a plan: document everything, preserve all footage, file a formal complaint with the county, and prepare for the possibility of both civil and criminal proceedings. But Scott, she added, be careful. HOAs like this don't go down quietly. If you're right about the scale of what they've been doing, they'll fight back hard. I was still processing Diana's advice when someone knocked on my back door. I tensed immediately. Brenda and Ray had used the front entrance. No one came to the back unless they knew me personally. I approached the door carefully and saw a familiar face through the glass. Bradley Allen, my neighbor from 2 houses down, is a 67-year-old retired Houston police officer who mostly keeps to himself. I'd exchanged maybe a dozen words with him in 2 years. I opened the door, and he stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. I saw what happened this morning, he said, his voice low and direct. Brenda at your door, Ray banging on your garage. I've been watching that woman operate for 8 years, and I know exactly what she's capable of. I asked him what he meant. He sat down at my kitchen table like he'd done it 100 times before. 3 years ago, Brenda tried the same thing with my garage, said she needed access for security storage, showed me some agreement I'd supposedly signed. I told her I'd arrest her myself if she set foot on my property without a warrant. She backed off because she knew I knew the law. He leaned forward. But most people don't know the law, Scott. Most people get scared when she waives documents and threatens fines. That's how she's been running this place, intimidation dressed up as procedure. I asked him if he knew what they were actually doing in my garage, why they needed a command center in a private residence. Bradley shook his head slowly. I don't know the details, but I know it's not just about parking trucks. I've seen them carrying boxes, files, and equipment, whatever they're running out of your garage. It's bigger than security patrols. He looked at me with the steady gaze of someone who had spent decades reading people. You've got them trapped right now. That's leverage. Use it wisely. I spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing the dashcam footage systematically, cataloging every entry date, every face, every piece of equipment I could identify. The pattern was clear. They came mostly between midnight and 4 in the morning, stayed for 3 to 6 hours, and left before sunrise. 47 documented intrusions over 23 months. I was deep into the footage from 6 months ago when I noticed movement outside my kitchen window. A figure standing near the fence line, partially hidden by the oak tree, security uniform, radio in hand. Not one of the 4 trapped in my garage someone knew. They had sent someone to watch me. I stepped back from the window, heart pounding. They weren't just going to wait for me to open the door. They were already planning their next move. The email hit every inbox in Pinewood Estates at 8:14 the next morning. I know the exact time because my neighbor across the street sent me a screenshot with a single word attached: seriously. The subject line read, "Urgent Resident Safety Alert," and the sender was Brenda Kessler, HOA President. The message was 3 paragraphs of carefully worded insinuation, each sentence designed to suggest without stating, to imply without liability. It described how I had restricted access to security personnel who remain in an uncertain situation. It noted that I had declined to respond to reasonable requests from HOA leadership and expressed concern about Mr. Jackson's recent behavior patterns. It urged residents to exercise caution near my property and report any unusual observations to the HOA office. She never directly called me a kidnapper. She didn't have to. The language was crafted to let readers fill in the blanks themselves, and 412 households were now doing exactly that. I stepped outside to get my mail around 10:30 and experienced the full weight of Brenda's campaign in a single moment. My next-door neighbor saw me from her driveway, froze mid-step, and retreated into her house without a word. A passing car slowed down, the driver openly staring before accelerating away. Across the street, a mother walking with her daughter crossed to the opposite sidewalk, pulling the child close as they hurried past. 3 separate reactions within 60 seconds, each one confirming what Brenda's email had accomplished. I had lived here 7 years without incident. Now I was someone to avoid, someone to fear, someone whose name would be whispered at dinner tables throughout the neighborhood. The transformation had taken less than 12 hours. The phone call from my daughter came at noon. Lily was 16 and lived with her mother in Dallas. Her voice was tight and confused when she asked about the messages her friends were sending her, the online comments claiming her father had trapped people in his garage. I explained the situation as clearly as I could: the unauthorized entry, the forged agreement, the fact that the men inside my garage had full access to the pedestrian exit and could leave any time they chose. The vehicle doors were sealed, yes, but the side entrance to the backyard remained unlocked. They weren't trapped. They were choosing to stay with their trucks and their equipment rather than abandon whatever operation they were running. Lily listened quietly. "Mom's worried," she said finally. "She wants to know if this affects anything." I told her it wouldn't. I hoped I was right. The police arrived at 2:17 in the afternoon. Deputy Martinez stepped out of the lead cruiser and met me on the porch. He explained that the HOA had filed a complaint using language similar to Brenda's email, careful phrases about restricted access and personnel welfare, rather than direct accusations of unlawful detention. I walked him through the situation: the footage, the forged document, my California alibi, the deed showing no easement. Most importantly, I showed him the side exit that remained fully operational. He examined it himself, confirming the door was unlocked and opened freely to the backyard. When he turned back to me, his expression was measured. "Mr. Jackson, this is a civil matter. You've secured the vehicle entrance to your own structure, which is within your property rights. The personnel inside have an available exit. There's no detention here." He paused. "But I'd recommend resolving this soon. The longer it goes on, the more complicated the narratives become." After Martinez left, my phone rang, unknown local number. Ray Hoffman's voice came through tired and frustrated, echoing from inside my garage. "Jackson, listen, we can end this right now. Open the main door, let us get the trucks out, and I'll personally make sure Brenda drops the fines and retracts that email. No lawyers, no police reports, just a misunderstanding that went too far on both sides." I asked him about the documents on my workbench, the folders I'd seen him studying through the window that first night. The line went quiet for several seconds. "That's HOA business. Internal security matters. Nothing that concerns you." I told him it became my concern when he brought it into my garage and used my electricity to run his operation for 2 years. He hung up without another word. His hesitation told me more than any answer could have. I called Diana and described the day the email's calculated language, the social isolation, the police visit, and Ray's offer. She asked me directly whether I wanted this over. She could draft a letter demanding they vacate and retract all defamatory statements. It would end by tomorrow if they complied. I thought about Lily's voice, the uncertainty in it. I thought about the neighbors who had crossed streets to avoid me. I thought about how simple it would be to open that door and watch this nightmare drive away. But then I thought about 47 documented intrusions over 2 years, about a signature forged on a date when I was burying my mother, about Ray's careful avoidance of every question that mattered. "No," I said. "I need to know what they're protecting. I need to understand why my garage was worth building an entire covert operation around." That night, I went back through the dashcam footage frame by frame, focusing on any visible documents in each recording. Most were too blurry, captured from angles that obscured the details. But in one clip from 3 months ago, the camera had caught Ray setting a leather briefcase on my workbench and opening it directly beneath the overhead light. I zoomed in, pushed the enhancement software as far as it would go, and felt my stomach drop. Inside were stacked folders with resident names printed on the tabs, names I recognized from mailboxes throughout the neighborhood. Clipped to the top folder was a business card bearing a logo I'd never seen before, Data Harvest Marketing Solutions. They weren't just storing equipment in my garage. They weren't just running security patrols out of my property. They were collecting something far more valuable than a parking space. And I was about to find out exactly what. Data Harvest Marketing Solutions had been fined twice in the past 3 years by the Texas Attorney General's office for acquiring consumer information through unauthorized channels. The fines were small, $15,000 total, but the pattern they revealed was damning. According to the enforcement records I found through public filings, the company had obtained personal data from sources that couldn't demonstrate proper consent documentation. Both violations involved residential communities where Data Harvest had acquired names, addresses, vehicle information, and behavioral patterns without the knowledge of the individuals involved. The company paid the fines and continued operating. Whatever they were doing was profitable enough to treat regulatory penalties as a cost of doing business. I called Diana first thing in the morning and told her what I'd found. She listened, then asked me to send her the enhanced screenshot from the dashcam footage. 20 minutes later, she called back with a careful edge in her voice. "Scott, this could be bigger than trespassing. If they have been collecting resident information and funneling it to a data broker, we're potentially looking at violations of the Texas Data Breach Notification Act and possibly federal wire fraud if transactions crossed state lines." She paused. "But I need to be clear, we're a long way from any official action. What I can do is reach out to contacts I have at the AG's Consumer Protection Division and the FBI field office here in Houston. They may be interested in what you've found, but interested doesn't mean they'll act immediately. These things take time." I told her to make the calls anyway. Any door that might open was worth knocking on. Bradley Allen came through before noon. He'd spent 30 years as a Houston police officer, and even in retirement, he maintained relationships throughout the law enforcement community. When I showed him the Data Harvest connection, he offered to make some inquiries through people he trusted. After 3 conversations conducted in the clipped shorthand of someone who knew exactly which questions to ask, he set down his phone and looked at me with quiet intensity. Data Harvest is on someone's radar at the federal level. A contact of mine heard the name mentioned in connection with complaints from HOAs in multiple states. Nothing active yet, just preliminary noise. But if you can establish a clear chain between the data collection and the company, that noise might get louder. He pulled up something on his phone and turned the screen toward me. It was a professional profile for Kevin Marsh, Regional Sales Manager at Data Harvest Marketing Solutions. In the personal section, it mentioned his wife's name, Patricia Marsh, née Kessler. Kevin Marsh was Brenda Kessler's brother-in-law. The connection reframed everything I'd seen. Brenda controlled the HOA. The HOA employed the security patrol. The security patrol had access to resident information during their rounds: names, addresses, vehicle registrations, daily patterns, anything observable or accessible through their presence in the community. That information could flow to Data Harvest through Kevin Marsh, presumably through arrangements that wouldn't appear on official HOA financial records. And my garage, isolated and rarely monitored, had become the perfect transfer point, a location where files could be compiled, data organized, and operations conducted far from the HOA's own security cameras. They hadn't just been using my property for storage, they'd been using me as cover. I went back to the dashcam footage with a new focus, searching for anything that confirmed the pattern. The evidence accumulated clip by clip, security personnel carrying file boxes into my garage and leaving empty-handed hours later, laptops connected to my power outlets, screens displaying what looked like spreadsheet software. Ray Hoffman is photographing documents with his phone before placing them in folders. And in one video from 8 months ago, a detail I'd initially overlooked: Kevin Marsh himself, walking into my garage at 2:47 in the morning, greeting Ray with a handshake, and leaving 20 minutes later with a cardboard box under his arm. I had Brenda's brother-in-law on camera, physically present at the operation running in my garage, removing materials. The evidence chain was taking shape. Diana called back that afternoon with a measured update. I reached out to my contact at the AG's office. She's interested but non-committal. They'd need a formal complaint and time to review before deciding whether to pursue anything. Same with the FBI liaison I spoke to. They're aware of Data Harvest from previous complaints. But they're not going to move on a single homeowner's footage without corroboration. She paused. Scott, if you want official action, you need to file complaints and then wait. Could be weeks, could be months. But if you want to confront this locally, the HOA quarterly meeting tomorrow night is your window. After you file with federal agencies, they may ask you to stay quiet while they evaluate. Your leverage is highest right now, before this becomes someone else's case. I spent the next hour preparing copying footage to multiple drives, organizing evidence into a clear timeline, and drafting talking points for the meeting. Then I made one more call. Andrea Price was an investigative journalist at the Houston Chronicle who had covered Data Harvest's previous finds and written extensively about HOA accountability issues. When she answered, I gave her the condensed version forged documents, 2 years of documented trespassing, a data collection operation run out of my garage, and a family connection between the HOA president and the company I believed was receiving the information. She asked careful questions, neither promising nor dismissing. Mr. Jackson, if what you're describing is accurate, it's a significant story, but I'd need to see documentation before committing to anything. I told her the quarterly meeting was tomorrow at 7. I told her she might want to attend and judge for herself. That evening, I was reviewing my presentation when I heard metallic scraping from the garage direction. I pulled up the interior camera and watched Ray Hoffman working at the main door seal with a pry bar. His movements were erratic, fueled by 2 days of confinement and mounting desperation. The men trapped with him had grown increasingly agitated as the hours passed, and Ray's leadership was clearly fraying under the pressure of having no good options. But the hurricane-rated bolts held firm against his efforts. After 10 minutes of futile prying, he threw the tool across the garage and slumped against the wall, chest heaving. He could have walked out the side exit any time, but leaving meant abandoning the trucks, the documents, and whatever else was in that garage that he couldn't afford to lose. His desperation confirmed what I already suspected: what they were protecting was worth more to them than their freedom. And in 18 hours, a room full of their neighbors was going to find out exactly what that was. The 72-hour mark passed at 3:17 in the morning, exactly 3 days since I'd first heard those diesel engines in my garage. I hadn't slept more than 4 hours total across those 3 days, running on coffee and the focused energy that comes from knowing you're about to upend someone's carefully constructed world. The dashcam showed the men inside growing restless, pacing, checking phones, occasionally stepping out through the side exit to the backyard before returning to guard their trucks and equipment. They weren't trapped, they were choosing to stay, and every hour they remained was another hour of footage documenting their presence in my property. Diana called at 8 with final preparations. We reviewed the presentation structure, the order of evidence, and the legal framing that would make everything I said defensible against defamation claims. She reminded me that the quarterly meeting's open forum was protected under Section 8.4 of the HOA bylaws. Any resident could speak for up to 10 minutes on matters of community concern, and cancellation required a majority vote of attending residents, not a unilateral board decision. Bradley Allen confirmed he'd be there as a witness, along with 3 other residents he'd quietly contacted. Andrea Price had texted that morning, saying she would attend, but couldn't guarantee coverage until she'd assessed the evidence. Everything was aligned except the one variable: I couldn't control what Brenda might do when she realized I was coming. The call came at 11:47 from an unfamiliar number. The voice was calm, professional, and completely unknown to me. Mr. Jackson, my name is Kevin Marsh. I believe we have some mutual interests to discuss. I kept my voice neutral while my pulse quickened. Texas was a one-party consent state for recordings, and my phone was already capturing every word. I asked what interests he meant. I understand there's been some friction between you and the Pinewood Estates HOA, property disputes, access misunderstandings. These things happen. He paused. I also understand you may have encountered information that could be misinterpreted without proper context. I'd like to offer that context, along with a gesture of goodwill. I let silence stretch before responding. I asked what kind of gesture he had in mind. $50,000, he said without hesitation, transferred within 48 hours. In exchange, you open your garage, dispose of any recordings, and decline to discuss this publicly. Everyone walks away satisfied. I asked why a marketing company would pay $50,000 to resolve a neighborhood property dispute. The line went quiet for several seconds. I see you've been busy, Mr. Jackson. Let's just say some parties value discretion and prefer avoiding misunderstandings that could affect multiple business relationships. I pressed him on what business relationships. The kind that benefits everyone involved when they operate smoothly. Communities need services. Service providers need access. Occasionally, arrangements are made to facilitate mutual benefit. Your garage happened to be useful for certain logistics. I told him I needed to think about it. He suggested meeting in person at a coffee shop on Main Street, 2 o'clock. I agreed and immediately called Diana afterward. She was quiet for a moment. He's trying to buy your silence, which means he's scared. If you can get him to elaborate in person, that recording becomes significantly more valuable. Ask open-ended questions and let him talk. I told her I understood. The coffee shop was half empty when Kevin Marsh walked in at 2:03, mid-40s. Expensive suit, confident stride. He sat down without ordering and got straight to business. $50,000 is my final offer. I'm authorized to go that high. I asked who authorized him. He smiled thinly. People who prefer avoiding complications. Let's leave it there. I asked what kind of complications. He leaned back. The kind that arises when someone doesn't appreciate how interconnected certain relationships can be. We work with various communities. Your situation isn't unique, and it doesn't need to become exceptional. I asked what made my garage so useful. His smile flickered. Convenience, location, privacy. Nothing is more mysterious than that. But, Mr. Jackson, I'm offering you more money than most people see in a year to simply move on. The alternative is discovering how determined certain parties can be when their interests are threatened. I asked if that was a threat. He stood, buttoning his jacket. It's clarity. You have until 6 o'clock. After that, the offer expires. And he left without looking back. I sat there replaying the conversation. He hadn't admitted anything explicit, but he had confirmed enough relationships with multiple communities, authorized payments for silence, interests worth protecting aggressively. Combined with the footage of him physically present in my garage, it painted a picture any reasonable person could interpret. I sent the recording to Diana and headed home. I was finalizing the evidence sequence when Diana called at 5:45, her voice tight. Scott, we have a problem. Brenda just announced she's canceling the open forum portion of tonight's meeting. She's citing security concerns and ongoing legal matters. I asked if she could do that. Not unilaterally. Section 8.4 is explicit open forum can only be canceled by a majority vote of residents present at the meeting. She's gambling that no one will challenge her in the moment, that people will accept the announcement and move on. I asked what we should do. You invoke the bylaws directly. When she announces the cancellation, you stand up and demand a vote. If even one other resident seconds your motion, she's legally required to put it to the floor. I've already briefed Bradley and 2 others on the procedure. They'll support you. I stared at the evidence spread across my desk. 3 days of meticulous documentation that Brenda was trying to bury with a procedural trick. She thought she could silence me by controlling the agenda. She didn't understand that I'd spent 72 hours learning exactly how her own rulebook could be used against her. Section 8.4 gave every resident the right to speak. Section 12.2 required the board to honor procedural challenges raised from the floor. And Section 15.1 mandated that any vote requested by a resident must be conducted before the meeting could adjourn. Brenda had built her power on bylaws she assumed no one else had read. Tonight, she was going to discover just how wrong that assumption was. The Pinewood Estates Community Center was designed to hold 200 people comfortably. By 6:45, there were at least 230 crammed inside, with more standing along the walls and spilling into the hallway. Word had spread through the neighborhood that something was happening at the quarterly meeting, though nobody seemed to know exactly what. I arrived at 6:50 with a laptop bag over my shoulder and a flash drive in my pocket, containing everything I'd gathered over the past 72 hours. Bradley Allen was already seated in the 3rd row, flanked by the residents he'd recruited. Andrea Price sat near the back with a notebook open on her lap, observing without drawing attention. Diana Reyes had wanted to attend, but decided her presence might signal that this was a legal ambush rather than a concerned resident raising legitimate questions. She was right. This needed to look organic. It needed to look like democracy was working. Brenda Kessler called the meeting to order at 7:02, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who had run these gatherings unopposed for years. She moved through the standard agenda items with brisk efficiency: budget reports, landscaping contracts, and a proposal for speed bumps on Cedar Lane. Ray Hoffman was conspicuously absent, still guarding his trucks in my garage rather than face whatever was coming. At 7:38, Brenda reached the final item on the printed agenda and paused, adjusting her reading glasses with deliberate care. Before we conclude, I need to address a procedural matter. Due to ongoing security concerns and pending legal issues affecting our community, the board has decided to postpone the open forum portion of tonight's meeting until these matters are resolved. She began gathering her papers as if the meeting was already over. I stood up. Point of order. The room went quiet. Brenda looked up, her expression hardening when she saw who was speaking. Section 8.4 of the HOA bylaws states that open forum can only be canceled by a majority vote of residents present at the meeting. The board does not have unilateral authority to suspend resident speaking rights. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Brenda's smile remained fixed, but her eyes had gone cold. Mr. Jackson, this is not the appropriate venue for your particular concerns. The board has made its decision based on legal counsel. I didn't sit down. Section 12.2 requires the board to honor procedural challenges raised from the floor. I'm raising one now. I move that open forum proceed as scheduled. From the third row, Bradley Allen's voice rang out clear and steady. Seconded. Brenda's composure cracked for just a moment before she recovered. Very well, we'll take a voice vote. All those in favor of proceeding with open forum, say aye. The response was immediate and overwhelming, a wave of voices that filled the room. Opposed. A handful of scattered responses, mostly from people sitting near Brenda. She stood frozen for several seconds, recalculating. The motion carries. Open forum will proceed. Mr. Jackson, you have 10 minutes. I walked to the front of the room, connected my laptop to the projector system, and faced 200 neighbors who had no idea what they were about to see. I started with the footage. The screen behind me displayed time-stamped video from my dash cam, 3 white trucks entering my garage at 2:17 in the morning, security personnel settling in like they owned the place, Ray Hoffman spreading documents across my workbench. I explained calmly that this had happened 47 times over 23 months without my knowledge or consent. I showed them the forged security access agreement with my signature dated March 15th, 2021, and then I showed them the photograph of me standing beside my mother's casket in San Diego on that exact date, 2,000 miles away. The room was absolutely silent. Next came the data harvest connection. I displayed the business card visible in the enhanced footage, the corporate filings showing the company's history of unauthorized data acquisition, and the professional profile linking Kevin Marsh to both Data Harvest and Brenda Kessler's family. I explained that my garage had been used as a transfer point for resident information names, addresses, vehicle registrations, daily patterns sold to a data broker with documented violations of consumer protection laws. Then I played the recording from the coffee shop. Kevin Marsh's voice filled the room, offering $50,000 for my silence, referencing arrangements with various communities, warning me about how determined certain parties can be. When the recording ended, I looked directly at Brenda. Would you like to explain your brother-in-law's interest in keeping this quiet? Brenda stood up, her face flushed with barely controlled fury. This is outrageous. These recordings are fabricated. This evidence is manipulated. And Mr. Jackson has been conducting an illegal campaign of harassment against HOA personnel for days. I will not dignify these accusations with... A woman in the middle section interrupted her. Brenda, is Kevin Marsh your brother-in-law or not? Brenda hesitated 1 second too long. My family relationships are not relevant to... Another voice cut in. You said the access agreement was legitimate, but he just showed us he was in California when it was supposedly signed. More voices joined, overlapping, demanding answers. Brenda tried to speak over them, but the room had turned. 6 years of accumulated resentment, the arbitrary fines, the selective enforcement, the fees that never seemed to benefit anyone but the board, all of it surfacing at once. The side door opened, and Deputy Martinez walked in, followed by 2 other officers. The room fell quiet again, Martinez approached the front, nodded to me briefly, then turned to Brenda. "Mrs. Kessler, we've received a formal complaint regarding criminal trespass, document forgery, and potential violations of consumer data protection statutes. We'll need you to come to the station to answer some questions." Brenda's face went pale. "This is absurd. I'm not going anywhere until—" Martinez's voice remained calm but firm. "Ma'am, you can come voluntarily now, or we can discuss this differently. Your choice." She looked around the room at 200 faces that had believed in her leadership for years, faces now staring back with confusion, anger, and dawning recognition. Ray Hoffman wasn't there to support her. Kevin Marsh wasn't there to fix this. She was alone. As Martinez escorted her toward the door, Brenda stopped beside me. Her voice dropped to a whisper that only I could hear, cold and venomous. "You think you've won something? You've just started a war you can't finish. There are people involved in this that you haven't even begun to understand." I met her gaze without flinching. "Then I guess I'll have to keep asking questions until I do." She was led out of the community center under the watch of every neighbor she had claimed to protect. The room erupted into chaos behind me. Questions, accusations, demands for explanation, but I barely heard any of it. I was thinking about what Brenda had said, about the people I hadn't begun to understand. 3 days ago, I thought this was about my garage. Now I was starting to realize it was about something much larger, and whatever came next, there was no going back. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks of the quarterly meeting, the Kendall County District Attorney's Office had filed charges against Brenda Kessler for document forgery, conspiracy to commit criminal trespass, and facilitating unauthorized sale of personal data. Ray Hoffman faced 47 counts of criminal trespass, 1 for each documented entry into my garage. The evidence was overwhelming time-stamped footage, forged signatures with provable alibis, recorded conversations, and a paper trail connecting HOA operations to Data Harvest Marketing Solutions. Diana Reyes told me she'd never seen a case come together so cleanly. 3 days of patience had produced 3 years' worth of prosecution material. Brenda took a plea deal in early December. 18 months probation, $25,000 in fines, and a permanent ban from holding any position in a homeowners association or community organization in the state of Texas. She sold her house 3 weeks later and moved somewhere nobody in Pinewood Estates cared to track. Ray Hoffman pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for testimony about how the data collection operation worked. He received 6 months suspended sentence, 200 hours of community service, and lost his security guard license permanently. The 3 other security personnel who had been trapped in my garage cooperated fully with investigators. They claimed ignorance of the broader scheme, and prosecutors believed them enough to offer immunity in exchange for their statements. They weren't masterminds. They were employees following orders from people who knew better. Kevin Marsh and Data Harvest faced consequences that extended far beyond Pinewood Estates. The FBI opened a formal investigation based on evidence suggesting similar arrangements with HOAs in 4 other states. Data Harvest's operations were suspended pending federal review, and Kevin was forced to resign while facing potential wire fraud charges. Andrea Price published a 5-part investigative series in the Houston Chronicle documenting the entire scandal, which led to 2 additional HOA boards in the greater Houston area launching internal audits of their own security contractors. The ripples spread further than I ever anticipated. The Pinewood Estates HOA held an emergency election 6 weeks after Brenda's arrest. The entire board resigned under pressure, and a slate of new candidates emerged from residents who had been quietly frustrated for years. Bradley Allen was elected interim president on a platform of transparency and accountability. His first official act was dissolving the private security patrol and contracting with a licensed, bonded firm that operated under strict oversight protocols. His second act was formally apologizing to me on behalf of the community for what had happened. I told him the apology wasn't necessary. He told me it was. The community meeting where everything changed happened on a Tuesday evening in January, almost exactly 4 months after I'd first locked my garage door. Bradley had invited me to speak, expecting perhaps a victory lap or a demand for additional compensation. Instead, I stood in front of the same room where I had exposed Brenda's operation and said something nobody anticipated. I'm not here to celebrate. I'm here because what happened to me could have happened to any of you, and none of us saw it coming. We trusted a system that wasn't designed to be trusted. We assumed oversight existed when it didn't. That's not Brenda Kessler's failure alone. That's our failure as a community. The room was silent. I continued. I'm proposing we create a resident oversight committee, 5 elected members with full access to HOA finances, contracts, and security operations. No more closed-door decisions, no more blind trust. If we want this community to work, we have to make it work together. The vote passed with 94% approval. 6 months after the scandal broke, Pinewood Estates looked different. Not physically, the houses were the same. The streets unchanged, but something in the atmosphere had shifted. Neighbors talked to each other more. Board meetings had actual attendance. The Oversight Committee caught 2 minor financial irregularities in its first quarter, both corrected without drama. It wasn't perfect, but it was accountable. My garage had new locks, new cameras, and a security system that sent alerts directly to my phone if anything larger than a raccoon approached the door. I'd thought about moving after everything that happened, finding somewhere with less history, but this was my home. I'd fought for it. I wasn't going to let that fight be for nothing. Lily visited on a Saturday in late spring, her first overnight stay since before the scandal. We ordered pizza, watched a movie she'd been wanting to see, and talked about everything except what had happened. When she left Sunday afternoon, she hugged me longer than usual. "I'm proud of you, Dad," she said, "for not giving up." I didn't trust my voice to respond, so I just nodded and watched her mother's car pull away. That evening, I sat in my garage workshop for the first time in months, finally ready to reclaim the space that had been stolen from me. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Mr. Jackson, I live in Arizona. Our HOA has been doing something similar to what you exposed. I found your story through the Chronicle articles. Can you help me understand where to start?" I stared at the screen for a long moment, remembering my own confusion 3 days into a nightmare that seemed impossible to escape. Then I started typing. First step, check your property deed for easements. Second step, document everything. Third step, don't give up. Justice doesn't always come from courtrooms. Sometimes it starts with one person who refuses to accept what everyone else has learned to tolerate. Sometimes it starts with a locked door and the patience to wait for the truth to reveal itself. If this story meant something to you, subscribe to my channel and share it with someone who needs to hear it, because somewhere out there, another garage door is opening in the middle of the night, and someone needs to know they don't have to accept it.